Good morning, Dan and Amy. And I go back to this interview that Yoram Lass, the former director of Israel's health ministry, gave to Spiked Online about the shutdowns, both in Israel as well as around the world. It is the first epidemic in history which is accompanied by another epidemic, the virus of the social networks. These new media have brainwashed entire populations. What you get is fear and anxiety and an inability to look at real data, and therefore you have all the ingredients for monstrous hysteria. He is, Mr. Lass, I assume he's a doctor, but I don't know, former Director General of Israel's Ministry of Health, a staunch critic of the lockdown policies around the world, if you haven't figured out, as are many, and some of those who have made predictions about how this would transpire were right, and right from the beginning, and silenced from the beginning. For more on this and a few other topics, we're pleased to be joined by David Rubin, former mayor of Shiloh, Israel, president of Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, dedicated to healing the trauma of child victims of terrorist attacks, as well as rebuilding the biblical heartland of Israel through the children. He's also the author of the new book, Trump and the Jews. David Rubin, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Dan. Good to be with you.
Why don't we start just with since Yoram Lass provided that interview, where Israel is with respect to the lockdown policy. I know they were one of the countries that was moving to begin the reopening of schools and the sort, but how Israel has fared, which we understand from the data is pretty well, and where popular opinion stands on the policies that were chosen.
Okay, certainly. Well, look, in Israel, we went into full lockdown mode pretty quickly, and it was done with communication from the prime minister. He informed people of how it was going to be done. It was done gradually, and to the point where the lockdown was almost complete. It was also common sense lockdown. Not everything was locked down, but the steps were taken, and it was done in a very disciplined way. You have to understand that in Israel we are used to states of emergency. We have a lot of wars. We have a lot of terrorism. So going into a state of emergency is not a hard thing for Israel. It wasn't pleasant, but it had to be done. It was done for a period of about almost 2 months. And then we started gradually coming out of it, and the speed of the coming out of it has been pretty quick, and it's been according to the numbers. The numbers are down, and have continued to go down of deaths and infections. There were other things that were done though that led to this opening up that we have now, which is an almost complete opening up. The restaurants are opening up tomorrow. The hotels and catering halls will be opening up in another few days. So everything is happening pretty quickly and successfully. So what is the reason for the success? Well, people, the people who were ill were quarantined. Those who had coronavirus and had it moderate, or either lightly infected or moderately infected, were put in what we called corona hotels. And in those hotels, because there's no tourist in this industry, we closed down the borders completely. There was no tourist industry. There was no flights coming in. In those coronavirus hotels, the people with light and moderate infections were treated. So they were taken away from the rest of the population. They were treated, and then they were able to go back to their lives. It was a common sense approach.
Well, how many cases did you? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, how many cases did you have, and what was your death total in Israel?
Well, yeah, the amount of cases, I don't recall the exact figures, but we're talking just a few thousand. And the death total. Well, let me put it this way. Instead of just telling you the death total, I want to make comparison. Israel has a population of 10 million people. New York City has a population of 8 million people, give or take. So it's about the same population. New York City has had over 20,000 deaths. Israel has had under 300 deaths.
Wow.
So I think it's clear that we were doing something right.
Yeah, I mean, the confirmed case fatality rate in Israel, just to continue that, is 1.68%. That's the confirmed case fatality rate, according to the, um, uh, the data compiled to this point. The other thing that's interesting is in Israel, this is a Real Clear Politics count on this, the number of COVID-19 related deaths is 1/5 the number of annual deaths with respect to the seasonal flu. So just in terms of how effective and but it also speaks to the reaction to COVID-19 as compared to, say, the seasonal flu. I understand in the beginning this is novel, so it's unknown, so you are on the side of caution. But it does seem to inform decisions going forward if, for example, there's a second wave, as we're talking about in America, about whether a lockdown is prudent. If it's not prudent for the seasonal flu, then why would it be prudent for COVID-19?
Sure. Well, look, the main difference is that for the seasonal flu, there is a vaccine.
Yes.
And for the coronavirus, there isn't a vaccine. So yet.
Yes.
But we'll get to that point. I know President Trump has been working very hard on pushing that forward, that there should be a vaccine by the end of the year.
Well, let's talk about President Trump, since you have written the book Trump and the Jews, to explain the nature of the American Jewish community and its relationship to President Trump and its general loyalty to the Democrat Party, at least at about a 70% clip. What's the angle of incidence for you with respect to Trump's relationship with the Jewish community in America?
Well, look, President Trump has been by far the best president in American history for the United States-Israel relationship. Without question. I mean, he's been remarkable in increasing the intelligence cooperation, in increasing the military cooperation, business cooperation, technological cooperation, all of which Israel has a lot to contribute to the United States. And so President Trump, really, there's nothing to talk about when it comes to the relationship with the country that I live in Israel. But as far as American Jews, there is a problem. There is a problem that we have a small part of the American Jewish population, small but growing, part of the American population, which is the more religiously identified Jews, who are absolutely enthralled with President Trump, think he's doing a great job. They're more conservative. But then you have the majority of the American population, the American Jewish population, that's off the rails. They're just so obsessed with liberalism, and if they would learn a little bit about Judaism, they might realize that Judaism and liberalism do not equal each other. That Judaism is actually quite conservative in a lot of its views. And it's quite common sense. So President Trump has been trying to get the support of those Jews and hasn't been having such an easy job of it, although some of the Jewish independents are having doubts about what the Democrats have been offering, including a lot of anti-Semitism.
Well, I mean, the reaction, I can't imagine a more antagonistic statement or statements, plural, since he's made multiple statements, than have been offered by New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, or Warner Wilhelm, depending on your preferred name, which is to say, you either shut those synagogues down now or they'll be shut forever. I mean, statements like that, and targeting the Jewish community specifically, the Orthodox Jewish community, in tweets and rhetorically, are just remarkable statements that have gone largely unremarked upon by the left-wing press corps.
Well, look, he was taking an isolated funeral, which, by the way, was coordinated with his police department, so obviously he didn't know what was going on. And he just made a public statement for liberal public consumption. And all of the liberal ideologues thought that he was making a great statement criticizing this particular funeral that his police department had coordinated. So where was he while his police department was coordinating it? That's number one. Number two, the Jewish community has by and large been very disciplined as far as responding to the crisis and respecting the rules. So when he made a statement criticizing the Jewish community as a whole for what seemed to be a violation of the rules by one particular group of people, which actually was quite an extreme group of people, it was at best unfair and at worst quite bigoted.
Well, and isn't it quite telling, though, too? I mean, this is the way that the left speaks about groups: the Jewish community, the black community. That's the sanitized version. They're really treating them as monoliths rather than as individuals or particular congregations, if it's a synagogue in question. And so just the rhetorical choices they make are instructive, or at least should be.
And that's exactly why I wrote the book Trump and the Jews, because I don't want people to accept this rhetoric. I think that people need to look at the facts. So the Democratic Party takes the Jewish community for granted and takes the black community for granted. Well, I think that American blacks and American Jews should both be looking at the facts on the ground and looking at what President Trump has been doing that have actually been wonderful for both of those two communities.
He is David Rubin, former mayor of Shiloh, Israel, president of Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, dedicated to healing the trauma of child victims of terrorist attacks, as well as rebuilding the biblical heartland of Israel through the children. He's the author of the new book, Trump and the Jews. David Rubin, thanks so much for joining us. Good luck with the book.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
The stock market is tanking. Unemployment will likely reach an all-time high. Experts are saying the worst is yet to come, but what we need now is a solution.